This landing page was first imagined with GPT Image 2.0, and then the full polished layout was built with GPT 5.5. In this video, I'll walk you through my process on how I came up with this idea, how I used GPT Image to generate the visual direction section by section, and how I brought everything into Aura to build the final landing page. So let's get started. So I've heard that GPT Image 2.0 was really good, but I was curious about something more specific. Could it actually help with UI design? Not just creating a nice looking image, but imagining a full landing page layout that feels consistent, premium, and realistic. So I opened a new chat in ChatGPT and started with a simple experiment. I basically told it I want to build a full landing page, but instead of starting with code, I want to start with images. I want you to help me imagine and design the full layout section by section, so every section feels like it belongs to the same website, even if we generate each image separately. So the first step was to choose a topic. I asked for something practical, something that could work as a 6 or 7 section landing page. ChatGPT came back with a few strong ideas, including a luxury recovery club, an AI interior design studio, a boutique AI travel concierge, a future fitness lab, and a no-code AI design OS. For this first experiment, I chose the AI interior design studio. The idea was simple: a high-end AI platform that takes rough room photos and turns them into a cinematic interior design concept. Then I asked GPT Image to imagine the first section, the hero. And honestly, I was pretty impressed with the result. Right away, it had a clear visual identity, the color palette felt warm and premium, the typography direction was interesting, the layout had a nice editorial feel, and most importantly, it didn't look like a generic AI generated landing page. So from the first image alone, I already had a strong design direction. After that, I replied back and said, I like the hero section, I like the style, and I want you to continue generating the rest of the page. The important part was that I asked it to keep the same vibe across every section. Same color palette, same visual language, same typography direction, and the section still had to feel realistic and functional and not just pretty composition. Then GPT Image generated the rest of the landing page. So this became the second section, the philosophy section. And as you can see, it still feels connected to the hero. Same warm palette, same editorial layout, same premium interior design feel. Then it created the third section, the style library. After that, the how it works section, then the AI intelligence section, then the pricing section, and finally, the final CTA section. So at this point, I had a full visual direction for the entire website, generated section by section. And what surprised me is that I didn't really have to fight the model or keep regenerating over and over. For a first experiment, the images were already strong enough to use as a starting point. Of course, it's not perfect. Some details would still need to be fixed later, but as a creative direction system, this was already very useful. Before we jump into recreating the landing page from the GPT image references, I wanted to test something else first. I was curious to see what would happen if we tried to one-shot the entire landing page using only a detailed prompt. So instead of using the section images as references, I created a full prompt that described the whole concept: the theme, the color palette, the typography direction, the layout style, and all the sections that should be included. The idea was simple. Let's give Aura a very detailed prompt and see how far it can get without any image reference. So I copied the prompt, pasted it inside Aura, clicked send, and waited to see what kind of result we would get. Usually, when you give Gemini 3.1 a very detailed prompt, the result can be pretty good. Most of the time, it can avoid that very generic AI look, especially if the prompt gives it enough direction. So here's the first iteration. And honestly, from the first look, it's not terrible, but it's not the best. The font choice is okay. The color palette is not bad. It kind of understands the premium interior design direction. But the layout itself feels very average. The hero section doesn't really have a strong composition. The section feels a bit too standard, and overall, it still feels like a landing page generated from a prompt, not a landing page built from a strong visual reference. So if I wanted to use this version, it would need a lot of work. The biggest missing piece is visual direction. The page needs a stronger design system, stronger layout rhythm, and a clearer visual identity before it can feel premium. So this is where the experiment gets interesting. Let's go back to the GPT image workflow. Now we already have a strong hero image as a reference. And instead of trying to invent the layout from scratch, I want to recreate that hero section as closely as possible in code. But I don't want to just upload the image and write something simple like recreate this layout. That kind of prompt is usually too vague. If we want a better result, we need to give the AI more context. We need to explain what matters in the reference, the layout structure, the typography, the spacing, the color palette, the overlays, the image treatment, and the overall feeling. So I prepare a more detailed prompt for the hero section. The prompt basically says I'm attaching a reference image of a landing page hero section. Recreate this hero section as closely as possible in code. Then I added specific requirements for how the AI should read the image, preserve the composition, match the visual hierarchy, keep the left and right side balanced, recreate the floating UI elements, use a premium warm color palette, and avoid making it look generic. So first, I wanted to test this with Gemini 3.1. I pasted the detailed prompt, attached the hero reference image, and generated the first version. And this is what it gave me. In terms of structure, it does resemble the original reference a little bit. You can see that it understands the general idea, text on the left, big visual on the right, floating cards, and a premium interior design feel. But it still needs a lot of work. The spacing is not quite there, the typography doesn't feel as sharp, the right side doesn't have the same balance, and overall, it doesn't fully capture the elegance of the reference. So next, I tried the exact same thing with GPT 5.5. Same prompt, same reference image, same task. And this is the first iteration it generated. Right away, I felt like this version had more potential. It still wasn't perfect, but the structure was closer, the layout felt more balanced, the typography direction was better, and the floating UI elements were closer to what I wanted from the original GPT image reference. So from this point, I decided to continue with the GPT 5.5 version and start refining it section by section. Now, I want to show you how I like to edit my design. This workflow has been working really well for me, especially where I want more control over the final result. When I first started using AI builders, most of my edits were done through prompting, and honestly, I still think that's a good way to start. You can say something like make the hero more premium, or improve the spacing, or make this section more modern. And sometimes the AI gives a pretty good result. But after a while, I wanted more control. So instead of only relying on prompts inside the builder, I start pairing the exported HTML with GPT 5.5 thinking. And the reason I like this workflow is simple. It feels more natural. I provide the context, upload the reference image, upload the current HTML, and then I just talk to the AI in plain language. I'll say things like make the headline tighter, make the matrix stays on one line, and improve the contrast of the floating cards. Then GPT 5.5 gives me the updated code for that specific part of the design. There is definitely some back and forth. You copy the code, paste it back, test it, look at the result, and repeat. But for me, this is way more effective than trying to put every single change into one giant prompt. Because when you ask the AI to fix too many things at once, sometimes it improves one part but weakens another. Maybe it fixes the spacing but changes the typography, or it improves the card design, but suddenly the layout balance is off. That's why I prefer working section by section. and sometimes even smaller than that. For example, if the hero section is complex, I might tell it only focus on the right visual. That way, the AI knows exactly where to focus, and when it gives me the updated code, I only replace that specific part instead of touching the whole page. Now, if you're new to code, this can feel a bit overwhelming at first. When you open a big HTML files and see hundreds of lines, it's easy to get lost. You don't always know where one section starts, where it ends, or what you should replace. But with practice, it gets easier. You start recognizing the structure, you see the comment, you understand which blocks belongs to the hero, which blocks belongs to the image, which blocks control the buttons, the card, the overlays, and so on. That's basically how I learned to work with this kind of workflow. Not by being perfect at code from the beginning, but by going through the file, editing pieces, replacing section, and slowly getting more comfortable reading the structure. So here we have the first GPT 5.5 iteration of the hero section. And this is already a strong foundation. The layout structure is there. So from here, the work is not really about rebuilding everything, it's mostly about visual refinement. The first thing I did was export the HTML from Aura. Then I went back into ChatGPT, uploaded the original GPT image reference again, and attached the HTML from the first iteration. From there, I just explained what I wanted to improve. Nothing fancy, no magic prompt. I looked at the layout and said, the font needs to feel sharper, the matrix should stay on one line, the floating elements needs better contrast, the image side should feel closer to the reference, and the left and right sides should feel more balanced. That's it. Just clear, simple instruction based off what I'm seeing. GPT 5.5 then gave me an updated version of the hero code, and because this was still just one section, it was easy to replace. I copied the updated code, went back into Aura's code mode, selected the current hero code, and replaced it with the new version. Now, the result was better, but still not perfect. The font had improved, the metrics were cleaner, some of the spacing was better, but the headline was taking too many lines, the floating elements still felt a little too glassy, the contrast wasn't premium enough yet, and the left content didn't fully match the height of the right visual. So for the next iteration, I asked GPT 5.5 to balance the layout more closely to the image reference. I wanted the right visual to feel like it had the same height and weight as the text on the left. I also wanted the overlays to feel more solid and premium, not like transparent glass cards floating randomly on top of the image. And this new version was much better. The contrast started to feel closer, the layout was getting tighter, the right side felt more intentional. It still wasn't perfectly balanced, but now it was clearly moving in the right direction. And that's really the point of this workflow. You don't need the first output to be perfect. You just need a strong enough foundation, and then you guide the AI with specific visual feedback until the page starts matching the reference more closely. Now let's quickly review the main changes I made to the hero section before getting to the final polished version. But before that, just a quick note. When you edit through prompts inside the builder, your versions are usually saved under the prompt history, so it's easier to follow what changed from one version to the next. But when you're doing manual edits in code, the preview history can get a bit messy. A lot of the versions just show up as something like edit made by you. And if you have multiple iteration, it becomes really hard to remember which version was which. So I made a simple request for this. When I manually edit the code, I want to be able to rename each version. Now I can click Edit, rename the version, and add a few keywords for each iteration. It sounds like a small thing, but it makes the workflow much easier because I don't get lost between all the different versions. So now let's go through the hero section changes. And as you see, I'm not using some complicated master prompt here. I'm mostly looking at the design, explaining what I see, and telling GPT 5.5 what I want to improve. It's just a natural conversation. The first thing I adjusted was the metrics. The layout was almost there, but the text didn't feel balanced. So I asked it to improve the metric row and make sure the bold text was aligned properly across all the items. Then I made another very simple request. I asked it to make the floating UI elements feel more premium. That was basically it. I didn't give a huge explanation. I just said I wanted that part to feel premium. And honestly, I was surprised by the result. In the next iteration, the matrix were cleaner, and the floating containers on the right visual had more depth, better contrast, and a more refined card style. Now, I don't think make it more premium works perfectly every time. But in this case, GPT 5.5 already had a lot of visual context from the reference image and the current hero layout. So it understood the direction and applied the right kind of styling. After that, I wanted to fix the headline. The line break still didn't feel right, and I wanted the right image to extend further, almost like it was breaking out of the layout container and taking the full remaining space. So I asked for those changes, and in the next iteration, the headline felt much better. The image had more presence, the layout felt wider, and the whole hero started to feel closer to the original reference. At this point, I was pretty satisfied with the hero section. It felt balanced, premium, and well designed. But there was still one detail I wanted to fix: the images. The layout was using generic Unsplash style images, and to be fair, some of them look nice, but if you use Unsplash images for a while, you start recognizing them everywhere. They can make a layout feel less original, even if the design itself is strong. So I wanted to replace them with images that feel more custom and more connected to this concept. And this is where GPT Image became useful again. If you remember the original hero reference generated by GPT Image 2.0, the room itself looks really beautiful. The image matched the layout perfectly because it was created as part of the same visual direction. So I asked GPT Image to extract that idea and generate a few variations of the same room. I wanted one empty before room and then a few styled version of that same room. And this is what I got. I had the empty room, one styled version, another variation, and a third version. What I like about this is that it feels like the same room transforming through different design direction. So instead of using random images that only kind of match, now the visual feel like they belong to the same product experience. It almost creates this perfect before and after transition effect. Then I downloaded those images and went back into Aura. Inside Aura, I opened the asset panel. Usually, Aura detects the images used in the layout so you can replace them directly. Here, I selected the main hero image. You can see it was using an Unsplash image. And yes, you could search for another image inside the Unsplash library or use Aura's built-in asset library with over 30,000 assets. But for this project, I wanted to use the custom images created with GPT Image 2.0. So I uploaded my own images and replaced the one used in the hero section. I did that for all the image visible in the hero, the main image, the before thumbnail, and the smaller style previews. And now this is the final polished version of the hero section. So if we step back, this whole section started as an image inspiration generated by GPT Image 2.0. Then GPT 5.5 helped translate that visual direction into code. And after that, I refined the layout through a few simple, specific edits: typography, spacing, balance, contrast, and image replacement. Nothing too complicated, but now the result feels premium. The composition is strong, the font pairings works, the color palette feels intentional, and the custom images make the whole thing feel much more original. That's what I find really interesting about this workflow. It doesn't feel like I'm asking AI to randomly generate a website from scratch. It feels more like I'm using AI as a creative partner, first to imagine the direction, then to build the structure, and then to help me polish the details. So now that the hero section is in good place, let's move on to the second section. For the second section, I attached the GPT image reference and wrote a prompt asking Aura to recreate the layout as accurately as possible, while keeping the same style and vibe as the polished hero section. And this is what I got as the first iteration. Honestly, it's not bad. It respects the same visual direction we created in the hero. The warm color palette is there, the typography feels connected, And overall, it already feels like it belongs to the same landing page, but it still needed refinement. So once again, I went back to GPT 5.5. I attached the second section reference image plus the HTML code of the first iteration and asked it to enhance the section so it matched the reference more closely. And this is the version it gave me. Something improved right away. The headline was better. The quote container had stronger contrast. The truss strip had better spacing. And overall, the left side felt more polished. But the right visual was a different story. I asked it to make the right side more premium, but as you can see, sometimes the result does not work on the first try. In this case, I actually think the right visual became worse than the first iteration. The cards were stacked awkwardly, the spacing was off, and the layout didn't match the reference anymore. And this is a good example of something important. AI does not always fail because the whole idea is bad. Sometimes it just struggles with one specific part of the layout. Here, the difficult part was the overlapping card composition on the right side. For some reason, GPT 5.5 had trouble placing those visual elements in the same position as the reference. I tried a few times, and I even tried prompting directly inside Aura to fix it, but the layout kept getting worse. So instead of asking it to fix the whole right side at once, I started breaking it down. I focused on each container individually, and that worked much better. By separating the problem into smaller pieces, I was able to control the position of each element and get much closer to the original reference. So this section is a good reminder that sometimes the best workflow is not to fix the whole section. Sometimes the better workflow is smaller instruction usually gives you more control. Eventually, after a few rounds of trial and error, I was able to reproduce the layout much more closely. So now the second section is complete. For the third section, I tried something a bit different. For section 2, I created the first iteration directly inside Aura. But now GPT 5.5 had more context. It had already seen the polish hero section, the second section, the color palette, the font direction, the card styling, and the overall visual system. So for the third section, I simply attached the GPT image reference and asked GPT 5.5 to generate the layout while respecting the visual direction of the previous two sections. And this is where the workflow starts to get really interesting. Look how good GPT 5.5 can be when it has the right context. The section already feels like it belongs to the same landing page. The typography matches. The color palette is consistent. The card styling feels connected. And the whole section has that same warm, premium interior design mood. There were still some minor adjustments to make. The headline needed better line breaks as usual. I also adjusted the spacing around the material palette, but overall, I was pretty happy with the card design, so I didn't need to change too much. And this is the final version of the third section. One thing I want to clarify here. Starting from section 2, I'm mostly showing you the first iteration and the final version. That does not mean I polish everything in only 2 tries. For the sake of this demo, I didn't save every single small change as a separate version because then I would end up with hundreds of versions and it would be impossible to follow. So what you're seeing in the version history is simplified. Some section had a lot of back and forth behind the scene, especially section 2. Section 3 was much easier because GPT 5.5 already had more context and the layout was less difficult to reproduce. So just keep that in mind. The workflow is powerful, but it's not magic. There's still a lot of judgment involved. You still need to look at the layout, decide what feels off, give specific feedback, and sometimes break the problem into smaller parts. But once the visual system is established, each new section becomes easier to build. Now, I repeated the same process for the fourth section. This time, GPT 5.5 generated the section code from scratch, and I pasted the code directly into the existing layout after section 3. And this is the first iteration. Honestly, for a first try, this was pretty good. This section is a bit more complex because there's a lot of moving parts, step labels, arrows, for product cards, visual UI details, and the privacy container underneath. So the fact that GPT 5.5 was able to generate something this structured on the first attempt was pretty impressive. From there, I only needed to make a few targeted fixes. The first thing I wanted to adjust was the arrow between the step. It needed to align better with the step title, so the timeline felt cleaner and more intentional. Then on the third card, the generate concept card, I wanted the main image to take the full width of the card. In the first version, there was padding around the image, so I removed the spacing on the top left and right. I also added more spacing between the four cards and the privacy container at the bottom, so the whole section had more breathing room. And this is the final version of section 4. I think this section turned out very well. It feels premium, but also realistic. It doesn't feel like just a conceptual dribble shot. It feels like something that could actually belong on a real product website. After that, I move on to section 5, the AI intelligence section. Again, I asked GPT 5.5 to generate the code from scratch. Then I paste it right after section 4. And this is the first iteration. In the prompt, I also asked it to make the right visual more interactive by adding a before and after slider. That detail matters because if I didn't ask for it, the right side probably would have been static. And for a first iteration, this was also pretty strong. The overall structure was there, the left content worked, the analysis panel looked good, and the image slider gave the section a more interactive product feel. But there was still a few things to fix. The headline needed better line breaks. The contrast on the before and AI concept label needed to be improved. The bottom caption bar had too much glass effect, so depending on the image behind it, the text wasn't always readable. I also needed to clean up the spacing inside the right visual container, especially around the analysis panel and the view full report button. And one thing I spent time trying to improve was the before and after image alignment. Ideally, I wanted both images to stack perfectly on top of each other, so when you drag the slider, the room stays locked in place and only the design changes. That was the goal. And this is the final version of section 5. The headline is fixed, the spacing is much better, the analysis panel feels cleaner, the contrast is stronger, and the slider interaction is almost there. It's not 100% perfect yet because the images are not perfectly aligned in the way I originally wanted. But the effect still works, and visually it gives the section a nice interactive moment. So if I wanted to push this further later, I could spend more time generating perfectly matched before and after images or refining the slider implementation. But for this version, I'm happy with it. Then I move on to section 6, the pricing section. The first iteration was also pretty good, but one pattern I noticed is that GPT 5.5 often gets the general layout right, while the headline breaks need some manual correction. That happened again here. So the first fix was simply to control the headline and make sure the line breaks the way I wanted. For this section, I also made a small layout decision that was different from the image reference. In the reference, the monthly and annual toggle was placed underneath the subtitle, but I felt it would make more sense if the toggle was centered above the 3 pricing cards. So I moved it there. Then I made a few more refinement. I fixed the width of the most popular peel so it stayed on one line. Inside each pricing card, there were originally 6 color palette dots, but the spacing felt too tight. So I reduced them to 5, which made the row feel cleaner and more rounded. I also wanted the middle studio card to feel more important, so I made it slightly elevated compared to the other 2 cards. And finally, I made sure the buttons at the bottom of each pricing card had proper spacing and aligned consistently. And this is the final pricing section. It keeps the same warm palette, the same typography, and the same card styling as the rest of the page. But it also feels like a functional pricing section, not just a visual mockup. Finally, I move on to the final CTA section. For this one, I used the GPT image reference as a starting point, but I didn't try to copy it perfectly. I wanted the image to be full bleed, taking the whole width. with the centered CTA card on top of it. Then I added another container underneath the CTA card for audience segment like homeowners, designers, and real estate pros. I also decided to add a footer. At first, the footer followed the same dark image treatment as the CTA section, but I didn't really like that. It felt too heavy, especially after such a cinematic final section. So I asked GPT 5.5 to switch the footer to light mode using the same warm background and panel colors from the rest of the layout. That made the ending feel much more connected to section 1 through 6. The only thing that still needed work was the container underneath the CTA. It was lacking contrast, and the borders and dividers were not reading clearly enough. So I made one final fix to improve the border, and now the final CTA section feels much better. For this section, I didn't follow the image reference 100%, but that's also part of the workflow. The GPT image references are there to guide the direction, the layout, the mood, the hierarchy, and the overall visual language. They don't have to be treated as strict rules. From the hero section all the way to the pricing section, I stay very close to the original references. But for the final CTA, I made a few decisions based on what felt better for the actual page. And with that, our full landing page layout is complete. Before we wrap up this video, I want to quickly show you some of the other references GPT Image 2.0 generated for the other topics ideas. The first one was a luxury recovery club. This was imagined as a premium wellness and recovery studio combining cold plunge, sauna, breathwork, mobility, and performance tracking. Then we had the AI interior design studio, which is the concept I used for this full landing page. After that, GPT Image generated a boutique AI travel concierge. This one was imagined as a luxury travel planning service powered by AI, focused on hidden stays, private routes, and curated itinerary. The fourth concept was Future Fitness Lab. This was a next generation gym combining AI coaching, recovery pods, wearable data, and high performance training. And the final idea was a no code AI design OS. That one was imagined as a creative platform where founders can generate landing pages, UI system, and visual DNA from references. So as you can see, all these layouts were imagined with AI using GPT Image 2.0. And honestly, I think this is where things are getting really interesting. AI is getting much better at visual direction and UI inspiration. Not perfect, of course. You still need judgment. You still need to refine the layout, fix the code, adjust the spacing, and make design decisions. But as a starting point, this is very powerful. Instead of copying someone else's website for inspiration, you can generate your own visual direction from scratch. And what surprised me is that a lot of these layouts don't feel generic. They have interesting composition, strong color palettes, clear moods, and ideas that can actually be translated into code. So for me, this workflow is not about replacing design taste. It's about accelerating the creative process. GPT Image can help you imagine the direction, and GPT 5.5 can help you translate that direction into code. And then you still guide the final results through your own eye, your own edits, and your own feedback. So just to recap, we started from one GPT image hero reference, expanded that into a full set of section references, used GPT 5.5 thinking to recreate and refine the layout, replaced the generic images with custom GPT image visual, and then added subtle animation and interaction to make the page feel more polished. That's the full workflow. So I hope you enjoyed this experiment, and I hope it gives you a new way to think about AI design. Try it in your own workflow. Start with the image, use it as a visual direction, then build and refine section by section. If you enjoyed the video, just make sure to leave a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.